Hello, welcome all, welcome in another video, and in this video we'll be looking into important topic in a CSS. So in this video we'll be looking into what is grid layout. So when we say layout, it is nothing but placing, the way of placing your HTML elements in a certain way. So here, as you can see in front of us, we have airbnb.co.in website is open, and as you can see here, we can clearly see there are different areas and different type of information is displayed there. So let's consider this area. This area itself has three different sections, and the top section is giving headline, and then the bottom section is giving images, and also just below that it is giving description about each image. So it is all about layout. So layout is nothing but placing your HTML elements in a certain way so that it will look good. So entire structure and looks of the website will be depends on how you are giving spacing, font size, then which fonts you are using. Also, the most important thing is layout. So in a CSS we have different techniques through which we can decide a layout of our website. One is using tables, another one is using flex, grid layout. So let's have a look into grid layout. So this is going to be really important because grid layout gives you two-dimensional structure. So whereas if you are using flexbox, it is just giving you a single dimensional. That means either you can decide row layout or you can decide column layout. You cannot decide both row and column layout. So let's have a look how it looks like. So here we are in csstricks.com. This is one of the best article out there for grid layout. So as you can see here, we have all information about grid layout. So let's understand what actually it means. So like I said, grid layouts allows us to do two-dimensional structure. So let's understand what is grid. So grid, we might have seen this graph paper where we have number of rows, number of columns, and we can draw graph inside of it. So this is how graph paper looks like. So this is nothing but horizontal lines crossing over vertical lines, or you can say vertical lines crossing over horizontal lines, and while it crosses over each other, it creates cells. So as you can see here, the small rectangular part gets created inside, and that is nothing but the cell. So let's come back here. As you can see, we have 5 different definitions and words that we need to understand before we start with the grid layout. So the first thing is grid container. So obviously whenever we use any graph paper, we have certain rectangular part. So that is nothing but our container, because all grid is gonna be there inside of that particular rectangle. So we can call this image or this surrounding boundaries as a grid container. So in CSS, where whichever the element or division we are going to use as a parent, so that will be our grid container. So grid items. So again, if we look back here, as you can see, each of these crossing lines creating one container. Okay, so that is nothing but the items in a grid. So whichever the elements we are going to put inside of our container, so that will be considered as grid items. Lines. So grid lines are nothing but horizontal and vertical lines which is cutting each other and creating different cells. Okay, so yeah, fourth concept is grid cell. So as you can see, they have given this highlighted color and it is showing each cell. So each rectangular part will be considered as a cell. Grid track. So whenever we create grids, so we can, if we go horizontally up to the end, we can say it as a grid track. We can even go from top to bottom where we will get column track. Grid area is the combination of different grid cells. So here we have learned about grid cells. So here each of this rectangular part is considered as a grid cell, and if we combine all nearby cells together, it will create grid area. So that's all about basic concepts. So let's try to understand how it works. Well, let's go inside our code and let's try to create one simple HTML file. Well, let's see all this concept and in the code. So as you can see, we have grid.html file here. Let me close all other files, and I currently I have very simple setup. This live server plugin is there, which is the live server plugin is there. If you don't have that installed, you can simply go and install this. This will basically help us creating one port number, or in the current directory will be hosted as a local host. So if you want to use this, you can use this, because whenever I'll make changes here, it will automatically get reflected here. If I say once I save this, so it it reduces the effort of refreshing this. Okay, so if we look at this CSS trick website, as you can see here, we have different concepts and different properties given here. So let's understand this one by one. So let me just create one basic simple HTML structure which has head and body. Okay, so let's declare one division and let's give it a name container. So we know that we whatever the elements, whatever the items we are going to insert, that is all going to go inside of this container class. So you can give it a name container, or most of the people I've seen, they are giving it a name wrapper. So you can give any name. So let's give it a name wrapper, and let me just declare one style tag here, and let's give it. First property we will need to write is we need to give display property, and inside of display property value will be grid. Okay, so now let's start creating few of the items inside our wrapper. So now we are done with our basic setup. So now let's understand how it actually works. Let me just quickly refresh this. Let's see if it works or not. So yeah, currently we have this all elements ready with us. So let me create simple common class which will give border as well as some padding to each of this class, so we can clearly see what's difference we are actually making it. So give it a border, let's say 1px solid, and give it a purple border. Okay, and one more thing we'll need to give it, and that is 10px of padding. Okay, so stop this, go live again, localhost 550. Okay, so now we have this all our class. Cool. So now let's give this common class to each of this element. Okay, so we got border and some padding to each of this item. Okay, so now the first thing that we need to do is, as you can see, by default it is occupying 100% of width, and it has occupied top to bottom approach. It has just followed top to bottom approach. So now let's try to change this. So this is our wrapper class, and inside of this we can decide how many columns we want. So let's use one property, and that property is grid template columns. So here I can provide number of I can provide different values, such as, let's say, if I give 40 px for first column, and second column I want of 100 px, and third column will be of 60 px, fourth column of again 40 px. So you can give it as many as column you want. Also you can provide values in percent. So let's say if I want 20% of first column, then the 40% of second column, and then rest how much, again I think 40 remain, so let's give a 40% of another column. So as you can see, we got the three different columns with 40 40, second and third column, and then first column got 20%. If you don't want to do that, you can write one more property with the name repeat. Okay, so we can write one more, we can give number of columns with one more property, and let's declare a repeat. And as a first parameter to this function, we need to give how many number of columns you want, let's say 3. And second parameter you want, in the second column you need to, in the second parameter you need to provide width. So if I'm giving 3, so it should be 33.33% to each. So let's save this. As you can see, we got 3 columns with equal width. Okay, so now let's start giving property to each one of this on each one of this item. So let's declare one class dot one, and let me give one property grid row. So this property will decide at which row I want this column. Okay, so first column, as you can see, it is in the first row. So this is our row, and this all vertical lines, vertical sections will be the columns, and horizontal will be the rows. So currently our first section, that is nothing but one class, is in the first row. I want that to be in the second row, so let's give it second. As you can see, it came into the second. If I give any other number which is greater than 2, it will give just one more, the current number of rows plus 1, and it will give me the position. It wouldn't happen that if I give it a 9, so it will leave some space in between, and then it will go up to the ninth row. It won't happen. It will just create one more row, and it will give its position. So it doesn't matter if I give 900, it will just be positioned in the third row. All right, so that's about grid row. One more property is there, column. Grid column. Okay, so with this property we can decide at which column I want this first this grid item. So as you can see, we have this one item in the first column. If I want it into the third column, I can simply write 3. Yeah, so it is placed in third grid column. If I give it a 6, let's see what happens. So it created, it just go horizontally so far. All right, so with this property we can decide number of at which row and column we can give we want our grid item to be displayed. Okay, so now let's understand how we can create template out of it. So let's try to give name to each of this section. So as you can see in the documentation, we have one property which we can give each of our element, and that is nothing but grid area. So let's see how we can use it. Okay, so now for one class I want grid area, and let's give it a name 1. Let's do the same thing for rest of all grid items. Okay, so now we have just given grid area name to each of our grid item. Let's simply refresh this. Okay, so now inside of wrapper class we get one more property through which we can decide template of elements which is inside of a wrapper class. So simply use grid template areas, and as a first column I can give this type of properties. So 1 2 6 is there, and if I want 3 and 4 just below it, I can give its name. So what's going on here, let's understand. So first of all, we have given it a name to each of the, or we have given name to each of our grid item. So grid area 1 will be this, grid area 2 will be this. So with this way we got a reference to each of our grid item, and we can use that reference and create template out of it. So whichever sequence I'll give it here, it will get applied to that particular grid item. So let's say 5. So as you can see, currently I gave 1 or 2 as a first row. This is 1 or 2 our first row. So we got 2 different elements in our first row. In the second row we got 3 and 4. So here we have 3 and 4, and in the third row we got 5 and 4. So if we already have 4 in our second column, that's the reason why it get extended up to the next column. So with this way we can decide the position of our grid elements and grid items, you can say, and we can create template out of it. So we just saw the basic concepts of grid items. We'll see more of the properties of grid in our next video. So see you then.